Bobcats to another edition of From the Field to the Fans. I'm your host, Quixem Ramirez, and joining me is managing editor Odus Evbagharu. What's going on?
Nothing much. Looks like you kind of took my job moving on up in the world here at the University Star.
Slowly but surely. You're the 1A to 1 might be, my 1B to 1A, Tony Parker, Tim Duncan, interchangeable roles, really important to the podcast regardless.
Any way for you to use the Spurs, it's kind of ridiculous.
Cannot help myself. You get a Spurs reference in there, it's a good podcast.
Well, at least they win, so.
Oh, man, speaking of not winning, Texas State heading into Louisiana-Monroe, coming off a 24-point loss to Louisiana-Lafayette, 24-point loss. National television didn't really show their true colors, according to Fran. 11 days off, actually, before Monroe. Last year, 21-14, lost a rushing touchdown, 18 seconds to go. Fran called it a heartbreaker, a loss that really set the tone. Last year they responded afterwards. Will they respond after Lafayette?
I think they will. I think they'll be able to respond against Lafayette. I think, Texas State kind of has a Louisiana curse right now, not being able to be successful against the two Louisiana schools last year, and then Lafayette just kicking their butt on national television, ESPN2. That's a memory that they fade away. I think this is third long break, I guess, is the charm. They had the long break before they played, I believe, Navy, and they lost that one 21-35. They had the long break before Lafayette, and they got, drilled. So now they're going to have another long break against Monroe. So I guess this one, third one's the charm. I think the game from last year, Tyler Jones, I believe it was his second game, 6 of 15, 67 yards, 4.5 average passing per completion. The 2 pick sixes to Isaiah Newsome, one for 71 yards, the other one for 75 yards. He made SportsCenter top 10 against Texas State last year. That was pivotal in the game. And then when Tyler Art is coming back into the game to replace you, you didn't have a very good day.
They beat themselves in that game. 15 penalties, 156 yards. 2 interceptions, both resulting in touchdowns of 70 yards or more. The running game was successful, but Arndt and Jones combined just really struggled. Louisiana-Monroe got to them. And defensively, the Bobcats, when they weren't watching Louisiana-Monroe score a touchdown off of an interception, they actually held them to only 1 score, but that score happened with 18 seconds to go, happened to be the game winner. And as the story goes, it wasn't their night. They almost, when you look at it, hold Monroe to under 200 yards total, 360 yards. That's a good offensive performance, and that's something that Texas State really beat themselves. And I think they're the better team last week, probably this week. Do you think we should take anything away from that matchup? Is it too soon? What are your thoughts on that?
The matchup from last year,
yeah.
Correct? Yeah and no. I think, again, Tyler Jones' second career game, I think expectations were high because of how well he played against Wyoming, and then he played Monroe, struggled there a little bit. I don't think there's much you can take away from that game. I think the one thing that, like you alluded to, is the fact that, Texas State beat themselves. And I think that's one thing that Coach Dennis Franchione can look at a team and say, you know what, last season we beat ourselves against a Monroe team that was fairly decent, but it was also a Monroe team that didn't have their quarterback. I think Keith Browning only played a little bit in that game, if any. Against the Warhawks first year, getting your feet wet in the Sun Belt, I don't think there's too much you can take away from that game except for the fact that most of the wounds were self-inflicted. I'm
going to go back to preparation. Third straight game with 10 or more days of preparation. Coach Fran said it's always nice to have that extra preparation, game plan and scheme. But I feel like it's hurting the team because they have that time to, recope and reset, and then they get complacent. Then you start seeing their performance against Navy, Lafayette, and that starts to materialize because they have a lot of time to think about the game and, relish about the win and, human nature. You're going to look at the game, you're going to be, okay, we can rest. We have 10 days. And that's the key thing that I feel like preparation is going to influence this game. Will they take advantage of that preparation? And that's something that when you were talking to Fran in your interview Tuesday, he talked about preparation, and Tyler Jones' progression. Take a listen.
All right. Coach Dennis Franchione here with me. Coach, I know last Tuesday is a memory that everyone wants to forget, but what do you tell the team in the 10 days that you had to prepare against Monroe? Is it something that you just tell them, put them on the back burner, just forget about it, or watch the film and learn something from it so that way you're more prepared against Monroe?
Well, it's always a learning experience, and I don't think that game was reflective of what our team's been like this season. We played a good football team, and we kind of put ourselves behind the 8 ball early with a few plays, and it's hard to do that against a Lafayette and come out the way that you want to. But we all, I think, have confidence we're a better football team than what we showed that night. We'll bounce back. We match up better against Monroe. This was certainly a tough, hard-fought game last year, but you got to learn from what happened, good or bad, and move forward.
Coach, I know you've been talking about Tyler's play a little bit. Tyler Jones, the quarterback. What have you and Coach Schultz done with him for the past 10 days? Have you gone back to the basics? Have you watched more film? Have you told him to relax more in the pocket? What's the train of thought there when you're talking to Tyler Jones these past 10 days?
I think the biggest thing, 2 things with Tyler. He needs to take care of the football. His fumble was a result of carrying it with one hand and getting hit from behind. And he needs to be able to feel the pressure and tuck the ball away so that he doesn't have that. And then he needs to trust his protection a little better. Sometimes he gets on the move or on the run a little bit better or a little bit too early, and the protection was really a little bit better than maybe he felt. And sometimes that just is more. It takes more and more time to do. And Tyler's a good scrambler, so sometimes he goes into that mode maybe a little quicker than he needs to because he's had success doing it at times. But really, other than that, I mean, his play is always going to be a little reflective of his teammates and how they play around him too. It's not just him. When we can run the ball with some success, we can be more balanced and do more things. And we didn't get anything done very good on a consistent basis the other night. And again, Lafayette deserves a lot of credit for that.
And you talk about something good, and I kind of want to talk about Michael Odiari, his senior defensive end, 8.5 tackles for loss. I believe he has 6.5 sacks, and he's leading the conference in both categories. What do you see differently in his play from this year that's different from last year?
Well, I think a couple things. I think experience has helped him. He's a senior, and he got a lot of playing time last year, and I think he feels pretty good about that. And then I think Coach Thompson's got him in a good position in our defense now that fits him really good. And so those things are helping him. Mike's really good as a pass rusher. His quickness is really a benefit for him in that area. I'd like to see him play the run a little bit better at times. But Mike's quickness pays dividends all the time, but he's not the biggest guy sometimes. So when he gets matched up in the run game, shedding blocks is a little bit tougher for him, and that's he just needs to work on that a little bit more.
Coach, you've played tough teams this year. You've played Illinois, you've played Tulsa. I mean, you played Lafayette on Tuesday. Does playing those teams when you're heading into Monroe, especially them being pass-heavy, spread-oriented teams, is there things from the game plan that you take from those games and try to implement them against Monroe?
Sure. Every game for your defense and offense has its own uniqueness to it. Monroe's style of defense is much different than a lot of people's, and their style of offense, on the other hand, is similar to some other people we've faced. So, you don't ever throw out everything that you do. You adjust it to what they do in both sides, offensively and defensively. And so there's carryover for us that we'll try to do in this game.
In that interview, I'm glad that you mentioned competition. They've been put in positions where they've been exposed on nationally television. Tulsa, Illinois, Navy, Lafayette. They've stubbed their toes in those matchups, but at least they've been exposed. And heading into a matchup against Louisiana-Monroe, when you look at them, best run defense in the conference, allowing 139.8 yards a game, worst run offense. That's where their strength relies. They are really good at plugging the gaps, creating pressure on the quarterback, and it's a matchup that is a little tough for Texas State, especially since they've been reeling after their loss against Lafayette.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really good matchup, to be honest with you. I know Monroe, I mean, they've played some tough teams themselves. Wake Forest, and they actually beat Wake Forest 17-10, ACC team. Played Idaho, played Troy, beat those two opponents, and they lost to, number 10 LSU. That's hard to go into Death Valley and win. Arkansas State, the defending Sun Belt champions, and Kentucky, who's an SEC team, playing two SEC teams so far before you head Texas State. Louisiana-Monroe is very well equipped to beat Texas State. They've had tough competition. They've tested themselves just like Lafayette did. And it's going to be an interesting matchup. One thing that I look for, the key for me is the red zone. Monroe in the red zone, 11 of 14. They've only been there 14 times, and they've converted 11 times, lost the ball 3 times in the red zone, only six touchdowns, 2 rushing, 6 passing, 78.6% efficiency, for them converting in the red zone, 5 of 5 for field goals. Then Texas State, I mean, sometimes you watch the game, you're like, how? When I say this number, they've been in the red zone 25 times, converted 23 times. They're third in the Sun Belt, 92% converting on red zone trips, 11 rushing, 10 passing, so 21 touchdowns, finding balance, 2 of 3 field goals, and only 1 turnover. So I think any team that gets in the red zone is going to be really interesting, and it's going to be really important, because last year when the Bobcats got into the red zone against Monroe, what happened? 2 pick sixes to the house, and that was the difference in the game. So red zone is going to be the key in this game, and hopefully Texas State's able to convert, and hopefully Texas State's able to stop Monroe when they get into the red area.
It's all about opportunities. Louisiana-Monroe doesn't beat themselves. They're +1 in turnover differential. They're led by their stingy defense. Their offense is just there primarily to complement them, to just give us enough offense for our defense to win the game for us. It's a strategy that's worked. They're 3-3 overall, 2-1 in the conference. Their defense is top-heavy. They have Jerron Johnson, preseason first Sun Belt defensive team. The team has 21 sacks in general. He has 4 sacks total, 42 tackles to his name, 6 feet, 280 pounds. He's a big guy in the middle of the field, creates a lot of pressure. And it's just not just him. They have 3 guys with 2 sacks or more this year. So it's a multifaceted defense that really generates pressure from all angles, which is tough for the Texas State offensive line, which allowed 4 sacks last week. And their safety leads the team in tackles, 46 tackles, 3 picks. Usually when you have a safety that leads the team in tackles, it's indicative of a team that's struggling against the run, but that's not the case. I mean, they're stifling against the run. 139 yards allowed a game with 3.7 yards a carry. This is a team that relies on those 2 players to really muck up the pressure and muck up Texas State's offense.
Yeah, number one rushing defense in the conference. Like you said, number 1 defense overall in the conference. Texas State sitting at number 6. It's going to be interesting. Defensively, Monroe's going to bring it. They're going to bring it to a Texas State team that has the best quarterback efficiency in the conference. One of the better offenses in the conference, one of the better rush offenses in the conference. It's going to be an intriguing matchup between the Bobcats and the Warhawks. Now, the Warhawks are going to have home field advantage. That's going to definitely play a factor into it. And I think the offense of Monroe is going to maybe struggle against a Bobcat. 17.5 points per game. That's worse in the conference. 122nd in the country. 123rd in rushing yards. Had 84.5 per game. 62nd in passing yards. That never bodes well. And you can only score. Your defense can only do so much. As my old high school coach would say, hey, if you don't score, you don't win. So, your defense can only do so much. So, Bobcats coming in here averaging 30-something points a game, 33.8. That's still second in the Sun Belt. So, Monroe's going to have to score some points because your defense can only do so much.
Louisiana-Monroe, 3-point favorites at home. Razor thin margin of error, neutral field. This is probably a different contest. They have the home field, but it's going to be as every game. Players have to make plays and they have to do the things. But as we head into spotlight players, I wanted to focus on Rob Lowe. Last 2 games, he's averaged 39.5 yards a game. He had a knee injury, missed the Illinois game. Ever since then, he hasn't been the same running back. He's struggled to find the running gaps. His offensive line hasn't created them, and he hasn't been the shifty, dynamic guy, especially in the receiving game, that Texas State needs him to be. And for Texas State to succeed, he needs to be the Rob Lowe of old, not the Rob Lowe that he was last week.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with him. Maybe his knees getting a little bit healthier. I know he had the injury there. Hey, it starts at the quarterback. Tyler Jones is going to have to get it together. This year, 120 completions of 178 attempts, 5 picks, though. He's got to bring that number down a little bit. 67.4% percentage completion. Again, first in the Sun Belt quarterback efficiency, 148.4 with 13 touchdowns. He's also doing it with his legs as well, third on the team in rushing. But he's got to get it together. Fran talked to him. He's got to take care of the ball when he heads on the road against Monroe, and that's going to be definitely a spotlight that's going to be there for Texas State.
Fran talked about Tyler Jones and how this is a 14th start in his career. He is still ahead of the curve. You got to give him some leeway there. You got to give him some, time to make some mistakes, and I think that's a very obviously important part of the game. My second player, Dallas McClarty, doesn't get a lot of press, doesn't get a lot of notice, but he has 3 sacks in his last 3 games. He's the second player besides Odiari that's generating pressure consistently on the quarterback, and you can't just have Odiari, who leads the conference in sacks, be the only guy up front doing anything. McClarty, foot in the system, playing really well. He seems to have his, finding his stride, and if he can be that second guy that you need, then that's going to make Louisiana-Monroe job even harder.
Yeah, the reason why he's not getting all that press is because of my spotlight guy, Michael Odiari, 25th in tackles in the Sun Belt with 36, first in sacks with 6.5, second with 8.5 tackles for loss. It's going to be important for him to get pressure on Pete Thomas, a transfer student coming in, 221 yards per game in the air, 4th in the Sun Belt, 7 touchdowns, 1,326 yards, 4th in the Sun Belt, right in front of Tyler Jones. So Odiari is going to be important for him to get pressure on the Warhawks and on Pete Thomas. Texas State, 22 sacks for the year. I believe they're second in the Sun Belt, so that's going to be really interesting. Right ahead of Monroe with 21. So that's going to be very interesting for them.
Talk about a guy who's really come on and played better than he was last year. But enough talking about players and schemes and everything. Let's pick the game. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, because you're undefeated, I got to play some catch up. I was going to go Monroe, but I think I'm going to go Texas State. I think they win probably 35-17. Monroe just can't score the ball on the Bobcats. So I think Texas State wins it, get a game above 500.
I'm going to go tough game. If this is a neutral field, I think Texas State is the better team top to bottom. But on the road, I don't really see them winning this game. So I have Louisiana-Monroe scoring 27, Texas State scoring 21. Any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Texas State has to stay disciplined. Second worst in the Sun Belt with 41 penalties, just ahead of Appalachian State with 55, 65.3 penalty yards per game. It's got to stop. That's what stopped the Bobcats last year and 2 years ago. So they got to start playing better disciplined football in order for them to win this ball game.
I talked to Fran Wednesday, and he said how he just takes everything one. This is my final thought. He takes everything one at a time. But I think that mentality is a little concerning because this game is really the most important game so far. If you go down to 3-4 and you have, let's say, 5 games, you're in a position where you have to win at least 4 of the next 5. And that's something that you just certainly don't want. This team starts and ends in this game. If they lose this game, you don't know how they're going to go. You have to target that 7 wins. So another important game for the Bobcats, and just a very important game for them to get that Louisiana-Lafayette game under their belts and away from everything. But that's our show for today. If you have any questions or comments, leave it at universitystar.com, or you can tweet us at universitystar or at ustar_sports using hashtag Field2Fans. For Odus Evbagharu, I'm Quixem Ramirez. We will see you next time.